Holy cow. I'm going to say something. This is a statement, and I just finished this for the first time. This first book in the Dark Tower. This is the most compelling thing I have read in the last 10 years. Full stop. And I will try my best to explain why, because I am sure that not everybody agrees with that statement, or they'll be like, what the heck is he talking about? Now, if you will bear with me, I'll try not to talk about spoilers, even though I don't know what happens in the rest of the series, but I am so on board. I've cleared the docket. And this is what I'm going to be doing for the next however long. I got 75% of the way through this book and thought, I had to go online and see reviews of what people said, and I saw some people really liking it, and I saw other people saying, well, get through the first one, and then when you get to the second one, that's where it really takes off, because it's not anything like the first one. I don't want it to be any different than the first one. I want it to be exactly taking off from what this book did. Now, if it means it'll be told in a different kind of narrative structure or whatever, whatever. But I am thoroughly captured by this opening thing. Now, I'm not a Stephen King reader. I don't especially like the movies that come out because of Steve. Like, I don't go and see it. I saw The Shining once, and I was like, well, I'll never do that again. Like, it's just not my thing, really. I like some spookiness, and I like some of it, but it's not generally my thing, so I haven't really been a Stephen King reader. I was looking for some used sci-fi books, and I saw this at the front. It was just sitting at the front, and they were selling this set for $20. So I thought, oh, well, I wasn't going to buy the series, but if it's so cheap and they are in good condition, I might as well buy them. And so I did. And I've been on a sci-fi kick in the last while, where I've been doing all these short standalones and things. And I thought, this, and I also picked this up actually today, just being so engulfed with with the series. But like, my expectations are so blasted out of the water with what I thought it was going to be and what it ended up being. Just in the way I'm on this sci-fi kick, it has scratched all of those sci-fi sorts of itches that I currently have, but so much more. I assume this dabbles more into fantasy as this goes. I'll go through the different chapters, but the haunting stuff is amazing. The sci-fi stuff is amazing. Even though this is a 250 or so, well, this edition's probably different. This one's 300 pages. 250 to 300 pages. Even though it is that many pages in paper, there are thousands of pages in subtext. And I've seen also the extended reading that you have to do, and I'm totally on board for that. Like, that's partially why I went back to the used bookstore to make sure I pick up some of these used ones. Like, I'm definitely going to be reading The Stand. I'm definitely I want to read The Talisman, because I heard maybe Jake. Oh, shoot. I'm an idiot. It might be Jack, right? Shoot. You're just going to have to forgive me. But I'm going to be going through these in detail. Subscribe if you want to see my first journey as we go through this. But I want to read Talisman. I picked up The Eyes of the Dragon, which I don't know. I saw Roland is in it, but maybe it's not the same Roland, it sounds like. I don't know. But anyway, I'm going to go through this. And if you have your opinions of how I should do it, please let me know. But also, I think the reason why I got so much out of it, and I don't know if you have to, but a big part of the subtext, and really what the extended reading ought to be if you really wanted to truly get everything out of it, and this will sound weird, but it's totally true. It's the flippin' Bible. Like, if you really wanted to get the most out of it, for better or worse, this is building on the foundation of those stories. It's drawing on those stories throughout. And if you are not really cluing into those connections that Stephen King is kind of building on, it's going to seem confusing. But if you have those connections, like even if, and that's not to say like you'd have to be a believer in the Bible or not. It's just he's building on those stories. Early on, you have this Roland character, and he goes into this town of Tull. And I want to speak freely. I want to speak freely about this. So like, if you don't want to hear any spoilers, like just maybe click off, read the first one, come back. But I can, like, I'm so fascinated. This is the easiest 5 stars I've done in the last 5-10 years. Obviously, this isn't a biblical story, but like Roland is clearly playing roles that are supposed to parallel, right? Same with this Jake character who parallels like the Isaac character. Starting in the first chapter, we have this town of Tull, and this crazy stuff happening within it. And then it's like there's this culling of the whole town. And this is very Old Testament. And this whole town at the hands of Roland, almost as if he's this angel of death or angel of judgment, whatever it is. But it's very interesting as he's following who people think are the interloper, and they're calling him the Antichrist. And the interloper, if you know the primary text of what is in Genesis, of like the story of Adam and Eve, like sure, we've heard the stories, but if you know the primary text, the people who do will get more out of the intrigue of those stories. There's a number that's supposed to make this lady go crazy, and it ends up being 19. Now, a lot of people will read that and they won't really find it fascinating, but if you're kind of interested in like the Hebrew meanings and numbers and things like that, that's partially why it's so interesting and fascinating for people who have that subtext. You know what I mean? It's kind of like there's an oil that runs the machine, or it's like this subtext is like the mortar between the bricks, which make like the words. Does that make sense? It's like there's certain things that they're talking about that Stephen King is hoping that you are familiar with some of those stories. And maybe he'll help you become more familiar if it keeps going with some of that subtext maybe he'll get people up to speed. But if you already kind of are up to speed with some of those stories, this first book is like fascinating. So in the Bible, the number 19, various contexts, number 19 combining with 10 and 9 revolves around God's perfect order concerning his judgment in the Bible. We have that in the names of Job and Eve in the book of Job, if you're familiar with the primary text of that, like we have the Leviathan, same sort of subtext that drives books from the 1980s like Moby Dick. Like if you have that subtext, you're going to enjoy those books more, I think. Exploits of faith. Let's see. It means God's judgments to set things in order. And once he kind of whispers this into their ear, it causes them to just go crazy. And that's a very fascinating little chapter all on its own right. And if you don't kind of connect that that's what's happening, and that this person who's going around, this man in black, is like a Satan, Lucifer, tempter, interloper in the garden sort of character, and you see how that kind of progresses. Like a lot of the Bible is Adam and Eve leaving the garden, leaving paradise, and then we go through all this stuff, and then at the end it's like this return. But then we have this interloper antichrist that this man in black seems to be kind of taking on that sort of role and planting these little seeds in the minds of people as he goes on, which is totally on brand. Like we see these kinds of stories in Lord of the Rings. Anyway, it's very, very interesting. So we have this Roland character who feels almost like a Joshua Moses, but he doesn't have a horn, it sounds like. But let me go to the very last. Like, I gasped several times in this first book, and I don't know if everyone will maybe get the same. And I might be totally reaching, but I don't think I am. Like, I gasped at a few points, and I'll let you know. But let me read you the very, very last line, which was a major gasp moment. The gunslinger waited for the time of the drawing and dreamed his long dreams of the dark tower. And we'll talk about the tower, to which he would someday come at dusk and approach, winding his horn to do some unimaginable final battle. What does that sound like for people who are aware of the subtext? Like, he is like this angel in Revelation, ready to, sound his horn. So I got my Roland horn. I'm waiting for him to have a horn, right? Because that's clearly going to hopefully happen at some point if we're going to keep on brand with his character. I think very fascinating. I can't wait to go through this. If you'd like me to go through this chapter by chapter and kind of what I'm seeing as we go through, I would be happy to. But again, here's some of my thoughts. We get through that first. I mean, it's kind of like a Joshua entering Canaan. Like Joshua had the horn. This Ephraimite had this horn. The Battle of Jericho, they had their horns. The temple people had their horns. Going into battles, having horns. Angels having horns. It's just on brand with one of the earliest symbols in our history is a Hebrew symbol, which is the shofar, which is like the ram's horn, and that has continued on within like a Judeo-Christian sort of thing. Like, it's very interesting to find that also here mentioned a couple times, but not really, just that he doesn't have his horn apparently. Very, very, very interesting. What else? The desert in itself, like almost this exodus kind of from one place to the next place, like this purification and testing grounds going through this desert. Very, very interesting. We've seen water. Like at the end of deserts, we have this water where sometimes it's like it's like there's so much we could talk about on that side of things. Chapter 2, when we meet Jack or Jake. I'm such an idiot. Jake, not Jack. We find early on that this is kind of Abraham and Isaac telling, and you wonder from that point. You see that it's going on as we're going through this. Is Roland going to sacrifice Jake? Jake's clearly important. He needs to sacrifice him to get to his next progression. Just a retelling of that very fascinating, biblical, weird story, right? And we see that again here. And we see that in the first chapter where he's sacrificing this, like he shoots this lady that he's been with who's going crazy. But then again in that, and we see the hawk that kind of becomes that, you know what I mean? It's very, very interesting seeing him do these terrible things, but seeing how that kind of echoes as like a necessary thing to have to be willing to do to get to the next sort of thing. In the Abraham Isaac story, he didn't have to go through that in the end. And it was like just seeing if he would do that. And again, we're seeing if he would do that with Jake. And early on, like just like in the Abraham Isaac story, if you're aware of the firsthand accounts, or of the of the primary source, I guess, it makes note that, he loves Isaac. He loves Isaac. And you see that of all the things with Roland, and this is a definite character study of Roland, this first novel, and it's just such a blast. This could be a standalone, and it would still be just the greatest character study of Roland with the subtext that we have. But we wonder if he's going to do that. And he loves Jake, and he makes several mentions of this. And Jake is cluing into what is happening. And it is interesting, because I don't want to go on this tangent, but it is interesting to see some of the traditions about Abraham and Isaac. Like some have that crazy painting of Isaac like being bound and like terrified. Others have him being more of a willing participant, like almost doing this for his father as like a willing participant. There's just lots of tellings of this, and it was interesting to see how Jake would kind of, when the moment came, how that would go. And it so didn't disappoint. Again, the interloper stuff, super interesting. I have to add this after the fact, another gasp moment right at the end where we hear the name of the person he's working for or whatever, the name being Legion. That was such a gasp moment that won't be so for everybody. The high language, almost like they have forgotten some, they've forgotten the stuff from the past. It's almost like Roland is this last one holding on to, like this last line of whatever, I don't know, but it kind of follows the same sort of, like the subtext is just incredible. We get to chapter 3 with the drugs and the oracles. And if you know history, like a lot of these temples in ancient Greece and ancient Rome and ancient, like all these, like a lot of them had these different drugs being burnt. And that was a way of them communing with the gods or whatever. You know what I mean? And so as he goes into this ring and an altar, and you think this maybe is going to happen right now with Jake being sacrificed or something, but he goes in and you wonder, like, who is this medium or familiar spirit? Like Saul in the Bible, he goes and he's freaking out and he goes to ask things of this witch who does, like, I might be getting some of the references wrong, but it's just very interesting to see Stephen King tap into some of those early sorts of ways that the Oracle of Delphi was like a drugged up teenager. And just very interesting, very, very interesting. Again, I don't usually go to books that are very slasher and creepy, demonic, that sort of thing, but he did handle it quite well. Now, if it goes way crazy and it was quite vulgar at times, and that's usually not really my thing. So, but man, it's still so compelling. Holy smokes. The Tower of Babel kind of seems like kind of echoed here. I'm just very interested in it. Talks about this room and who's inhabiting this room. So much subtext. And if you aren't aware of it, it's fine. I'm sure we could keep going on, and it kind of makes you aware of some of those stories, and I might just be off the rails with this, but it's really a part of the DNA or the foundation upon what this book is, tapping into, sort of. He's tapping into a number of things. It's interesting that I wonder what other kinds of cultures or traditions might come into this first book. Like, obviously, like he asks Jake, are you familiar with the Bible? Like, it's very much that kind of foundation. I'm curious to see what else it does. For better or worse, like I am so fascinated with reading ancient documents, and it's the same reason I'm into like the Epic of Gilgamesh or the Iliad or the Odyssey. It's not always that we're just wanting to read a good story. It's that we want to read something that is almost like a conduit towards the way people told stories in those times. Like, I'm so fascinated with oral traditions for the same sorts of reasons. And so, again, the Bible is super fascinating for that sort of reason of kind of seeing what ancient people, like how they told stories. And we have some, like, obviously some of the stuff goes like are super weird, especially in Genesis, but like as it connects with like Assyria and Babylon and Rome, which were real places, and Egypt, sometimes telling similar stories, but from the other sides and other conclusions. And it's just so interesting to see who this Roland. Roland is the most interesting character that Stephen King is building up. And it's only been 250 pages or 300 in this. So let me know what I should do next. I don't want book 2 to be all different. I want to keep hanging out with Roland going towards this tower. But should I go to book 2 right away? Should I go to the stand right away? Should I go to this Eyes of Dragons or the Talisman or whatever? Should I just stay with the Dark Forest? Where am I so off in my assessment? Where am I on with my assessment? I don't want to be spoiled, but please, like and subscribe and comment if this is something that might be interesting to go through, for better or worse, even if no one is going to watch. Like I already did this sort of with Malazan, and of any new series that has captured me kind of in a similar way that Malazan has, where I'm like, oh, I want to dig deeper into this. It's not Sun Eater. It's not a lot of these things, which even though I'm such a fan of those and I think they're fine and fun, it doesn't scratch the same deeper thing where it's like there is stuff hidden in the sand of this series. And I'm just so here for it. And you guys have been holding out on me for real. Just kidding. So looking forward to the next one. I'm just so pleased by it. So anyway, I will talk to you guys on the next one, whenever that'll be. Bye-bye.